If you're brand new to GameMaker and just want to get a basic camera and game window set up, you've clicked on the right video. We're going to go over all the basics, the relevant options and settings, some things to watch out for, and we'll do some simple math so that you can focus on more important things like making a fun and interesting game. And we're going to do it all without writing any code. So let's get to it. We've got ourselves a pretty simple GameMaker project, but before we do anything, we need to take a look at some settings and make some adjustments based on the type of art our game is going to use. Click the gear icon up near the play button. We're developing for Windows, so let's click on Windows Platform Settings, and then Graphics. You can read up on what each of these do in the manual, link in the description, but let's talk about a few of the important ones real quick. Interpolate colors between pixels. This is a big one, and the main reason we came in here. When enabled, this option will blur the colors between pixels. As you can imagine, this doesn't look great if you are using sharp pixel art. So if your game does, uncheck this option. But if it's hand-drawn or HD art, then you can keep it checked. I'm going to uncheck it for this tutorial. Allow window resize. This will allow the player to resize the game window by dragging the corners with the mouse as well as enable the maximize button. I highly recommend you keep this disabled if you are a new GameMaker developer. It's a pretty unusual option to give the player and requires a bit of code to handle it well. Borderless Window controls whether you get the border and header on the window or not. If you turn this off, the player won't be able to move the window around on their desktop, which might be annoying, so we're going to keep this off. The scaling options control how GameMaker automatically stretches your game to fill your window. You always want to leave this at keep aspect ratio. There are very few reasons to use full scale, and you should only change this if you know what you were doing. Regardless, if you were going to mess with this at all, you'd probably end up doing it with code. So let's leave it alone. Alright, let's open up the first room of our game. You can see I've added some tiles and a character who can move around, but what we care about is over here in the inspector. The default room size is 1366 by 768. And if we were to run our game right now, the window that pops up is 1366 by 768 plus however tall the window header bar is. You could change the size of your room to control your window size, but this isn't a great idea. You don't want to be forced to make your levels the same size as your window. So let me show you a better way where you can size the room and the window independently. Near the bottom of the inspector, you'll see the viewports and camera section. Go ahead and expand that. Click the Enable Viewports checkbox, and then expand Viewport 0, and click the Visible checkbox. You should see a white border appear around your room. Here, there are three groups of options: Camera Properties, Viewport Properties, and Object Following. Let's actually start with the second one, Viewport Properties. Ignore the X and Y boxes, you'll probably never need those, and instead, let's just change the width and the height. I'll set them to 1280 by 720, a pretty common widescreen resolution. When we run our game, we get a window that is exactly 1280 by 720. So there it is. If you want to control how big your game's window is, Viewport Properties width and height will get the job done. However, there are a couple of things to keep in mind here. This only works in the first room of your game. If your game has multiple rooms and you are in a room that doesn't have the little house icon next to it, Viewport Properties won't do anything. Additionally, don't set this to the same size as your monitor. If your monitor is 1920 by 1080, don't set this to 1920 by 1080. The viewport size we are setting is the content of your window, and the window header bar is added on top. And Windows doesn't like it when you try to make a window whose total height is greater than the resolution height. It will squish your window to give the header bar room, which will not look good. Speaking of which, even this doesn't look very good. The camera is way too zoomed out, and although it's a bit difficult to see, there's some slight pixel distortion. I want to zoom in, and I want the pixels to be perfect. Time to fix that. Back in Viewport 0 settings, the Camera Properties group controls what is visible in your game. The width and the height control how much of your room is visible at any one time, while the X and Y properties move the camera around to show different parts of your room. Once again, you'll almost never want to mess with the X and the Y here, so let's focus on the width and height. If I set this to 100 by 100, you can see the white rectangle over in the room editor got smaller. The smaller that rectangle, the more zoomed in your game is going to feel. and the larger the rectangle, the more zoomed out. Let's run that and see. That looks awful. Now it's too zoomed in, and things are all stretched out. Let's go back to the view settings and see if we can fix this. If a width and a height of 100 was bad, how do we pick a size that will look good? We need to pick a size that has the same aspect ratio as our game's window. An aspect ratio is basically just the width of something divided by its height. 1920 divided by 1080 is 1.77 repeating, and 1280 divided by 720 is also 1.77 repeating. So these have the same aspect ratio. The easiest way to get a size that is the same aspect ratio as our window is to take the width and the height and divide them both by the same number. Let's pick 2 and see what that gives us. 1280 divided by 2 is 640, 720 divided by 2 is 360. And just to double check, 640 divided by 360 is, 1.77 repeating. It's the same aspect ratio as our window. When we run our game, that looks much better. No pixel distortion, not super zoomed in, but maybe a bit too zoomed out still. Let's do that math again, but this time use 3 instead of 2. 1280 divided by 3 is, 426.66 repeating. In that case, we probably don't want to use 3. We really want our camera dimensions to use whole numbers. Besides, you can't even type decimal points into the camera properties, so we really can't use this. So we'll kick it up to 4. 1280 divided by 4 is 320, and 720 divided by 4 is 180. And when we run, hey, that looks pretty good. At this point, you have to make some decisions about what's best for your game. The higher the number you choose to divide your window size by, the more zoomed in your game will be. And the lower that number, the more zoomed out. It's up to you to decide how big or small you want everything to be. So experiment with some different numbers and see what works for you. And if your game is pixel art, you really should be working with all whole numbers here. But if your game uses smooth, hand-drawn sprites, it doesn't have to be so precise. I encourage you to take some time to experiment with some different sizes and see what looks good and what doesn't. All right, we've got our window sized and the view in the room looks good. The last step is just to get the camera following our little player character who we can't even see right now. For that, we'll use the last group of options, object following. We just click the button that currently says no object and select our player object. You are unlikely to ever need to mess with the horizontal speed and vertical speed values, so ignore those. The horizontal border and the vertical border, however, control how close the player will need to get to the edge of the screen before the camera starts following them. Let's see what this looks like, and then we'll mess with those settings. So you can see my player can move around quite a bit and the camera doesn't move. But as he approaches the edge, then the camera starts to move and will stop only when it reaches the edge of the room, which my object doesn't care about. The bigger we make these borders, the smaller the box is that our object can move in before the camera starts moving. If I change the border to be 64 pixels and run again, you can see the box is much smaller and he can barely move up or down at all without the camera following him. If you want the camera to be locked onto the character perfectly, we can set the border to a very high number like 9999. And that will keep the character perfectly centered until the camera hits the edge of the room. Again, play with these options and find a setup that works best for your game. I'm going to leave it perfectly locked. And with that, you now have a game with the window size you want, the camera size you want, and it follows the object that you want. The last thing to remember is that each time you add a new room to your game, you need to go through most of this again. Enable viewports, make viewport 0 visible, set the camera properties to the same width and height as your other rooms, and set up your object following settings again. Every time. Don't forget, or it will cause problems. You now have everything you need to size the window and implement a serviceable camera in your game. Is it the best camera system ever? No. But if you are just getting started on your game dev journey, this is a great starting point. Take some time to focus on other, more important elements of your game. When you are more comfortable with GameMaker and ready to upgrade your camera, come back to the channel for the next video. I'll explain some of the issues with this system and we'll build something better. Until then, thanks for watching. Now go make something awesome.